2025年8月7日，川普在其社交平台 Truth Social 上发文，公开批评英特尔新任执行长陈立武，指控他与中资企业存在重大利益冲突，并要求他立即辞职，还强调这是唯一可行的方式。消息一出，立刻震惊业界，英特尔股价应声下跌3%。令人费解的是，川普主导这场均要沉死、称不能不死的戏码，背后真正的目的究竟为何？根据《金融时报》报道，陈立武在隔日旋即作出回应。他在致英特尔员工的一封信中表示，关于我过去的职务流传有很多错误的信息，并表明正在与白宫交涉，以确保他们掌握事实。这场突如其来的风暴在不到3周的时间里，局势出现戏剧性的转折。近期传出川普有意入股英特尔，从敌人到潜在合作对象，川普一连串操作引发市场与媒体热议。
U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday demanded the immediate resignation of new Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan, calling him, quote, highly conflicted due to his ties to Chinese firms. Tan, a Malaysian-born Chinese-American, was named CEO in March by Intel's board in an effort to turn around the struggling chip maker.
In April, Reuters reported that Tan invested in many companies based in China through his venture capital firm. His VC firm, Walden International, was involved in 2 companies that were sanctioned or blacklisted by the U.S. U.S. citizens can hold stakes in Chinese companies as long as the firms they invest in are not on the Treasury Department's Chinese military-industrial complex companies list. According to Reuters, Tan has not directly invested in any of the companies in this list.
Here was the president's exact wording on the Intel CEO. He said, the CEO of Intel is highly conflicted and must resign immediately. There is no other solution to this problem. So some harsh words there from the president. We have not yet heard from Intel publicly commenting on this one. But as you said, it does come after Senator Tom Cotton, an Arkansas Republican, claimed that the Intel CEO controlled dozens, he says, of Chinese companies, including 8 that he says had ties to the Chinese People Liberation Army. So much more to watch there with the president pressuring this CEO.
Look, I think the Walden International connection, where Walden is a VC firm in China that has investments in almost 70 companies. Some of them are on the entity list. It kind of begs the question, how did he take the top job at Intel, given he was still the chairman of Walden International? And it's not just, 1 or 2 investments. I mean, they are pretty big in China. So from that perspective, I do think there will be pressure in terms of explaining exactly what the board knew and, why they went with him, et cetera. But turnarounds are tough. In this case, Intel didn't have a choice. They tried almost, a decade to fix their manufacturing. They had 3 or 4 CEO changes. So a lot happened in between, and clearly there are still no signs of turnaround.
He's only been in the job 4 months. 2 years ago, the House Committee on China asked him questions about his history of investments in China. So none of this kind of association with China is new. That's just not new at all. What is new is that Intel recently, during earnings, cast doubts on whether it'll build the plants in Ohio that everybody's looking at as a cornerstone of chip manufacturing in the US, that it'll be very measured in its introduction of new chip technology. That has obviously created an undermining of this story of bringing back chip manufacturing to the US and sort of making the US great again in that particular area. So clearly that has caught the attention of politicians, and clearly they're not happy with the direction that that's going in. And obviously we're now seeing some kind of a backlash, and that's focusing on the CEO of Intel.
So, Mr. Secretary, how do you view then the CHIPS Act funds that have yet to be committed but have been promised? and the idea that that might be then converted to an equity stake. Is that how we should view it, that ultimately that's what you're talking to Intel about right now?
Yes. I mean, the president figures out that America should get the benefit of the bargain. I mean, that is exactly Donald Trump's perspective, which is, why are we giving a company worth $100 billion this kind of money? What is in it for the American taxpayer? And the answer Donald Trump has is, we should get an equity stake for our money. So we'll deliver the money, which was already committed under the Biden administration. We'll get equity in return for it, get a good return for the American taxpayer. Instead of just giving grants away, Donald Trump views we should get benefits for the economics that we put out.
Yeah, I love your response then to, I mentioned this analyst, Stacey Raskin, because he's written on it. He's one of the top analysts who follows this company for years. You know, he says that we note the company's recognized $2.2 billion in CHIPS Act grants to date. And suppose one could argue that given the delays, they probably aren't going to get all the rest anyway, that being another $8+ billion. Nevertheless, trading 10% of the company for what it now seems worse than the prior agreement, in which basically they were getting the money for free. You know, do you not put Intel in a better position?
Of course, it's worse.
Do you not put them in a better position to compete? Is that, you know, should that be a concern, since you want them to be the competitor you described earlier in terms of a U.S. champion?
Look, the CHIPS Act was just a giveaway to rich companies. I mean, why in the world is the United States of America taking money and giving it to companies like TSMC, which is worth $1 trillion? I mean, why would we give them money to come to America? Donald Trump understands how to do this. What he does is he says, if you don't build in America, you're going to pay a 100% tariff, and then watch them come flying in. So the idea is, let's change with respect to Intel. We want Intel to be successful in America. Okay? We'd like an American transistor built in America, right? We'd like an American to be doing that. So Donald Trump says, hey, look, let's turn the money that Biden was going to just give away and turn that to equity for the American people. Yes, it is a worse deal than giving it away. But when you put this money in the hands of Donald Trump, you're going to get a better deal for the American taxpayer. That's who Donald Trump is, and it's obviously the right move to make.
整起事件的开端可以追溯到拜登政府时期推动的晶片与科学法案。英特尔当时是受惠的主要企业之一，并承诺在俄亥俄州投资数百亿美元，新建一座全球最大的晶圆厂。然而，由于财务压力与成本不断上升，使计划进度一再延宕。这对新上任的川普政府而言，既是产业隐忧，也是政治负担。尤其俄亥俄是副总统范斯的家乡，也是选举的关键摇摆州。英特尔是少数仍具备大规模先进制程量产能力的美国企业，理应与台积电、三星并驾齐驱。但是过去数年，它在技术领先与是战上却远不如同业表现。今年新任执行长陈立武上任后，试图引领公司重返荣耀，但美国制造的复兴之路仍困难重重。8月18日，日本软银宣布将收购英特尔价值20亿美元的股份，展现对这家老牌美企的信心。随后，美国白宫官员也对外证实，川普政府正在研议以补助换股方式直接入股英特尔，并已进入政策评估阶段。对川普而言，英特尔早已超越单纯的商业问题，成为政治与国安的双重战略。第一是选举利益，俄亥俄州晶圆厂若能动工并如期投产，将创造数千就业机会，直接影响2026年中期与2028年大选的选情版图。其次是科技竞争，先进晶片是美中科技对抗的核心。川普急于掌握半导体产业链，确保美国在 AI 和军事应用上不会落后。因此，与其等待英特尔自己翻身，不如由政府直接介入，把它拉进国家战略资产的框架当中。在英特尔巅峰时期，美国政府持股几乎难以想象，但随着市值被超微与辉达超越后，英特尔逐渐丧失谈判筹码，反而让政府资本的入场变得可能。事实上，在这之前，川普团队就已经透过对在华晶片销售加征附加费换取出口许可， 为联邦政府创造了数十亿美元收入。如今，若补助换股成案，美国将在科技竞争的棋局中再度重塑规则。
Talk of the U.S. government taking an equity stake in Intel sounds dramatic, but for investors, it doesn't really solve the company's core issue, catching up in advanced chip manufacturing. In July, Lip-Bu Tan, the CEO of Intel, told employees Intel's advanced manufacturing would only move forward with, quote, confirmed customer commitments and, quote, no more blank chips. Or I should say blank checks. It was a direct signal to Washington, though. Without outside orders, Intel wouldn't build. The message landed after Tan's meeting also with President Trump. Intel has already received billions in CHIPS Act funding under President Biden. Now under President Trump, he's considering more support in the form of an equity stake, potentially funded through existing CHIPS Act money. Intel told me they wouldn't comment on that. But Intel still lags TSMC and Samsung in producing the most cutting-edge chips that power AI. Wedbush highlights key concerns with this potential equity stake. Federal investment won't improve Intel's fab capabilities in the near term. And then what strings are attached? Will shareholders face dilution? Federal cash doesn't change the fact that Intel needs both the technology and the customers to fill those fabs profitably.
Look, I mean, obviously it's a head scratcher. If you're an Intel shareholder, you're popping the champagne, right? I mean, because this is something that came out of left field, and obviously the SoftBank as well. But look, it crosses into a gray zone, right? I mean, a sort of line in the sand. Like Lisa was saying, does it end here? Is there more like this? And I think that's the issue, is that like as government gets more into, especially when it comes to chips and AI, there's a lot of unintended consequences. And I think that's some of the worry
we were having earlier, and it relates to Intel and the potential 10% stake that the U.S. Might take in that company. And what steps you think either the White House or the administration might otherwise take to try to persuade or aggressively sell Intel chips to U.S. companies? Because one of the biggest issues about Intel thus far has been that they're not selling as many chips as they should. And the Biden administration actually tried to put some pressure on big tech companies to buy these chips. And a lot of those companies said, we don't think the chips are good enough.
And the last thing we're going to do is put pressure, is take a stake and then try to drum up business. The stake would be a conversion of the grants and maybe increase the investment into Intel to help stabilize the company for chip production here in the U.S. There's no talk of trying to force companies to buy from Intel.
But no concern that, if you prop up a company that deserves not to make it, that it's just another example of almost too big to fail. Is Intel in the past, the government hasn't been great at picking winners and losers. But you think because of the foundry that Intel has, it's that important that the government actually helps to keep that viable?
Joe, there are industries that we have to onshore. I think you and I are the only ones in this conversation old enough to remember the Arab oil embargo in the 70s and gas lines. And I would say that the single point of failure for the global economy is that 99% of the advanced chips in the world are made in Taiwan. And for national security, we have to stop that single point of failure.
According to Reuters, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is considering a plan in which the U.S. will gain equity stakes in chip makers in exchange for grants given to them under the CHIPS Act. The U.S. may expand its equity requests to other companies that are set to receive CHIPS Act funds, including Micron, TSMC, and Samsung, Reuters reported. It's not immediately clear how much of a stake the U.S. would seek in those companies. Lutnick said late Tuesday the U.S. was eyeing a stake in Intel after White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt earlier said the Trump administration was in discussions to potentially acquire 10% equity, valued at roughly $10.4 billion, that could make the U.S. the chipmaker's largest shareholder.
对英特尔来说，这次事件只是川普把关键产业留在美国战略布局的一个节点，它刚好卡在3个交汇点。供应链安全、制造自主以及实打实的选举利益。 这个补贴换股策略不只是加速美国国内关键产业布局，也让企业在政治压力下被迫调整策略。回顾过去，美国政府也曾有过入股部分企业，利用资金来稳定市场，提振生产信心。因此，川普的做法并非完全没有潜力。但这次不同，接受补贴的对象不只限于美国企业，国际企业可能也将面对股权要求。目前，台积电已获66亿美元补助，用于扩大亚利桑那州晶片产能。三星电子获47.5亿美元补贴，并在德州建设价值370亿美元的先进晶片厂。SK 海力士也计划在印第安纳州建设约40亿美元的晶片封装厂。根据韩国媒体的报道，如果补贴换股扩展到其他企业，他们推估台积电可能要给出0.5%的股权，美光4.5%，三星1.5%， SK 海力士0.3%。如此将是政策的重大转变。在过去，美国政府很少直接入股外国上市公司。若补贴换股扩大到非美企业，除了企业章程，东岛国资本市场与外资审查规则还会牵涉外交与国安审议，法务成本与政治敏感度都更高。所以，如果把补贴换股看作政策工具，此刻的英特尔只是第一颗试金石。这套策略是否可行，最终结果都取决于企业愿意给多少治理空间，以及各国政府愿意让出多少政策缝隙。而这场川普主导的从补贴走向持股的政策转向，其实才刚刚开始。